gates. Rose Hill Cemetery was founded in 1840. It's the third cemetery that was in Macon. This one is on the National Register of Historic Places. It came along in 1840. The first cemetery across the river near Fort Hawkins, the second one out on the 7th Street industrial area, and then in 1840 the mayor and council felt that they needed a larger area, burial plot, and they selected these 75 acres on the banks of the Ocmulgee River above the city. Samurai Rose was largely responsible. He was on a committee of the pioneer citizens in Macon, and he, with his committee, picked this spot, and then he was very interested in the landscaping, the laying out of the cemetery, carriageways and so forth, and he imported many fine shrubs, trees for the cemetery. He patterned it after Mount Auburn Cemetery in Boston, which is a garden-type cemetery. This is the Dunlap Mausoleum, the first building right at the entrance gates of Rose Hill Cemetery. The Dunlap family were prominent in Macon. Mr. Samuel Scott Dunlap lived over across the river on what is known as Dunlap's Hill, and on the site of the Ocmulgee National Monument today. And he came over across the river and started the Dunlap Hardware Company. For those days, he amassed a considerable fortune. He had 5 daughters and 1 son. One of the daughters married Mr. L.O. Stevens, who lived in the fine house on College Street, which is known as Beale's 1860. Another daughter married a Mr. Wortham, and they lived further down College Street in a columned house that's now owned by Jack Caldwell. The other daughters married prominent citizens, one of Atlanta, Mr. John D. Little, and another one, Mr. Ashton Stark of Charlottesville, Virginia. And these people were all prominent in their various lines of work. When Mr. Dunlap Sr. died, his will stated that he wanted to be buried in his lot in Riverside Cemetery, and a monument not to cost less than $1,000 to be placed over his grave. They buried him in Riverside when he died in 1902, but the daughters traveled a great deal in Europe, and I think they were more impressed with the Italian mausoleums and the ones they saw in different countries of Europe. So they then came back in about 1905, I think it was, bought this little plot, which was a parkway, and they built this very fine mausoleum. I imagine in those days it might have cost $25,000 instead of the $1,000 that their father had in mind in his will. The vault, the mausoleum, will house 20 crypts. Mr. and Mrs. Dunlap Sr., the 5 daughters and the son, 4 of the husbands, and some grandchildren are buried in this mausoleum. Mr. Dunlap was moved from the Riverside Cemetery plot along with 1 grandchild, and then I think one of his earlier children might have been buried in Fort Hill Cemetery, and when they did this mausoleum, they then moved that child over here to the mausoleum. the two trees that are particularly outstanding here below us are the cypress, the two cypress trees that you do not see often in this part of the country. Pines, magnolias, cedars, many varieties, many fine specimens are found here. Of course, the tornado of 1954 did considerable damage to the trees as well as to the monuments. Mr. Rose laid out Rose Hill Cemetery, the carriageways, the terraces, and because of his outstanding work, Mayor and Council named the cemetery for him, Rose Hill Cemetery, and gave him his choice of lots. He selected a spot overhanging the Ocmulgee River, which was at that time in 1840 a beauty spot. But in 1880, the railroads came through, cutting just below his lot and many others in that section. And the vibration from the trains has caused tremendous damage to those monuments. Okay. Rose Hill is owned by the city of Macon, and of course all of the lots in the cemetery are privately owned. Mrs. Barbara M. Story, our present custodian, has done a wonderful job in maintaining the cemetery as best she can with her staff of workers. She is vitally interested in the history of the cemetery and concerned particularly from the historic standpoint of it. The City of Macon has been most helpful to our Middle Georgia Historical Society in the last few years through the Community Development Department by giving us a matching funds grant for restoration work in the cemetery. We've been able to get many of the old brick walls repaired thanks to that grant. Our Middle Georgia Historical Society is responsible for repairing most of the monuments throughout the cemetery. Now we are at the lot of Samurai Rose, who was largely responsible for Rose Hill Cemetery being what it is. Samurai Rose was born in North Branford, Connecticut in 1799. He came south at an early age and settled in Newtown, the little community in the shadow of Fort Hawkins across the river. He was a very enterprising young man, and he published a manuscript paper called The Bulldog. In 1823, when Macon was founded, he came across the river and established the Georgia Messenger, which was a forerunner of our Macon Telegraph. Mr. Rose was appointed on a committee by the mayor and council to select a spot above the city, inasmuch as the old cemetery down on 7th Street had been outgrown. His committee picked this spot, some 75 acres, above the city on the banks of the Ocmulgee River. And because of his interest in planning it, laying out carriageways, roadways, and importing many valuable trees and shrubs, the city named the cemetery for him, Rose Hill, and gave him his choice of lots. I know when he selected this spot, he thought it was a choice lot because it was right on the banks of the Ocmulgee River. But he didn't realize that 40 years later, the railroad was going to cut through here and create terrific damage to the entire cemetery from vibration and smoke and so forth. Simri Rose, 1799, 1869, and his wife, Lavinia Blunt Rose, 1812, 1883, and other members of this family. Now we are on a terrace just above the Simri Rose lot, at the lot of Lucius Neal Whittle. The cross is over Mr. Whittle's grave, and his wife, the monument, the headstone there, beautiful piece of funerary art, Sarah Michael Whittle, and their children, they're buried in this lot. Louis Neal Whittle was a great believer in free education. Among many other things, he was very talented. There's a monument, a stone at the entrance gate, Whittle Park, right up at the entrance to Rose Hill Cemetery, that gives you all the information that you would want on Louis Neal Whittle. His wife was a Powers, and the Powers family are also buried in this plot. Whittle School was named for him. It's one of the early schools in the Board of Education, which has now been completely restored for adaptive use and is one of the great restoration projects in the city of Macon. The Middle Georgia Historical Society has been active for the last several years in the restoration of a great many of the monuments and walls throughout Rose Hill Cemetery. This lot is of Samuel T. Bailey. He was born in Brattleboro, Vermont in 1796, and he died in 1870. Samuel Bailey was one of the early citizens of Macon, and I think possibly among the very first members of Christ's Episcopal Church. When we started our work, the wall in this lot was down completely. And it was one thing, because it was on Central Avenue, we felt it should be among the first jobs of restoration that we did. We removed the obelisk from the top of these stone-topped graves, and then removed the iron tops so that we could rebuild the brick vault. We had the top sanded and painted, and then set the obelisk back. This one is to Mr. Bailey's wife. Her dates, Mrs. Eliza Bailey. It says MOR 1853 AET 43. I think this means that she died in 1853 and her age was 43. Elizabeth Frances DuPont Bailey. 1853 was her death date. And the inscription is, "And left none who excelled her in all that adorns and beautifies the life of a Christian lady." This one is to Mrs. Martha Bailey, who died in 1847, age 37. This was the first wife. It's very difficult to read this one because the stone has weathered so badly. But he seemed to have more to say about the second wife than the first wife. This is the very interesting plot of the Blunt family. James H. Blunt was a congressman from this district in Washington for many years. and was sent on a commission to the Hawaiian Islands at one point. Mr. Blunt and his wife and members of the family are all buried here, and especially his daughter, Eugenia Dorothy Blunt Lamar, and her husband, Mr. Walter Lamar. They are buried here on the front section of the lot. Mrs. Lamar was better known as Miss Dolly, and she was one of the greatest leaders in the literary, civic, religious activities. Any field really of endeavor Miss Dolly was always involved in, because she was a brilliant person and a person of great personality. She is responsible almost entirely for Sidney Lanier being placed in the Hall of Fame at New York University. A number of years ago, within the last 5 years, I'd say, when the vandalism was at its height, this angel, of course, she's had her hand knocked off, and the stem to this lily was broken many years ago. But then, evidently, the cement had dried to the point that the vandals came in and knocked the figure, which is a beautiful Carrara marble, against this rough-hewn granite cross, knocked her down onto the ground here, and she was lying face down in the grass. I called my friend Braxton Market, who is a third-generation member of his family who has been in the monument business, and he, with his helpers, came out and put the angel back up and secured her in that spot. Her face is still a little grimy from lying there in that mud, but fortunately the citizens in Southern Bank have a cemetery trust that was set up by Mrs. Lamar, and they were able to take care of the expense of having that work done. Okay, this is the very impressive shaft in the Burke lot. Thomas Charles Burke came to Macon at an early age and established the T.C. Burke Paint Company. He amassed a considerable fortune. He, his wife, and his two daughters who survived him are buried here first beneath this beautiful monument. And then the other children of this marriage across the back of the lot. Martina Liguri Burke, Mary Henrietta Burke, daughters of Mr. and Mrs. T.C. Burke, established what is known as the Burke Foundation, the T.C. Burke Foundation. Under the terms of their will, they left a foundation particularly for the benefit of cancer sufferers, and it has been of tremendous assistance to many people who are unable to take care of the terrific expense under those conditions. On over in this lot is the monument to Christopher Burke. Christopher Burke, Mr. T.C. Burke's father, was born in Dublin, Ireland, died Macon, Georgia, aged 67 years. He died in 1884. Now, we've talked about vandalism in Rose Hill Cemetery, and this would be a perfect example. I wish you could have seen it when the cross here was knocked off of its base at this point here down onto this child's grave. The grave was broken all to pieces, and if it had not been that Mrs. Burke had set up a trust, the Southern Bank, as is the T.C. Burke Foundation, it very probably would have never been repaired. But as it was, they replaced the stone of the child's grave and restored the cross to its pedestal. This is a great piece of statuary here. Colonel Robert A. Smith. This is the Cleveland Smith lot. And in this lot there are several generations of prominent early citizens of Macon. The monument is particularly fine and in exceptionally good condition. It's weather stained, but no damage by vandals, which is remarkable. This monument was knocked off of its base and thrown back on the back here where a section of it was broken. But the descendants of this family, Daley Smith, resident of Macon and about a fifth generation in this family, had this headstone here repaired. This is another very interesting lot. There's one grave here of Catherine Cleveland. She died in 1841, and she was, I think, aged 100 years. Of Dwayne Allman and Barry Oakley, two musicians who were with the Allman Brothers Band and the Capricorn record. Dwayne Allman was killed in a motorcycle accident 1 year, and Barry Oakley in a motorcycle accident just a year later, not too far from the scene of the accident of Dwayne Allman. And so they buried these two together here in this lot. And as you can see, they have many admirers who come and bring false flowers, and they leave notes on the grave, and sometimes an empty wine bottle with a few false flowers, cigarette pack, beer can, little of anything like that. This shot will give you a good idea of the beauty of Rose Hill Cemetery from the standpoint of the terraces throughout Rose Hill and also the planting. There are many varieties of trees. I think one of the professors at Mercer University made a study of the trees in Rose Hill some time ago, and I think there were possibly 21 different varieties. The cedars predominate out here, but then you'll see they start up at the very top. That is up on Central Avenue, the main road when you come into the cemetery, and then these terraces drop on down to the level of the bottom of really what is a valley. This valley, I think, has been filled in over a period of years, and of course you see at the very bottom tier of lots the graves of Dwayne Allman and Barry Oakley. We have discussed those two graves earlier on this tape. This is the last resting place of some of the Confederate dead men of the Confederate Army who died in this area. You'll notice the inscription here at the steps, the Ladies Memorial Association to our Confederate dead, 1861, 1865. You can get more information on this plot on the Georgia Historical Marker at the entrance there, right opposite the main gates there. There's a historic marker that tells about the removal of the bodies of soldiers in this area, all brought over here on this hillside on the banks of the Ocmulgee River. It's a very picturesque spot, and on April the 26th of each year, about 50 years ago, all the schools were closed on April 26th, and the children would walk over to the cemetery carrying flowers to be placed on these graves, and they would have a service over here, a speaker, and usually some musical program. In more recent years, I don't believe April 26th is observed by the Board of Education. I think that schools are not closed on that day, but there is always a program here at this spot. This monument, just at the head of the Confederate graves, the soldiers' graves, is interesting mainly for the fact that in 1954, the tornado took from here up, just lifted this whole shaft and threw it down below this bank here. And we'll try to get a picture of that spot, the distance that the shaft was thrown. This monument is to Thomas Cooper Nesbitt. He was another member of the great Nesbitt family in Macon. He died in 1874, and other members of that family are buried here. This is a relative of Eugenius A. Nesbitt, who was one of the most prominent members of the Nesbitt family. Now we'll look over to this point to see the distance that we had to lift that shaft, that obelisk, to bring it back into place. This was when John Hood and his Southern Granite and Marble Company took an interest in helping us, and their two men, Willie and Leroy, on Saturdays would come out and work with me with a truck and a boom, and we managed to bring that thing back up from below and set it, with cement of course, set it back in its place. We've done this work now for the last 3 years and have just about restored all of the monuments with the exception of the one on the William B. Johnston lot. Mr. William B. Johnston, of course, built the Hay House, and I would like someday to think that that might be again put back on its base. William B. Johnston Monument, erected to the memory of the man who built the fine Italianate style house on Georgia Avenue, now known as the Hay House, owned by the Georgia Trust for Historic Preservation as a museum house. It's a great person, a great citizen of Macon. In 1954, the tremendous Scotch granite shaft that sat on this base was hurled over here, breaking one of the Scotch granite slabs and thrown in 3 pieces down below. The first section that would come back up on this base is the one right there at the base of the railroad track with its laurel swags. And then this piece would come next, and that one, hopefully, is not, the point of it is not broken, and someday, possibly, it might be put back in position. The Joseph Bond Monument is one of the finest pieces of sculpture in the cemetery. Well, that is, it was when it was placed here originally. The Washington Memorial Library has a picture of the lot as it was originally, with sandstone balustrades around the 4 sides of it. The monument, of course, was done in Italy. It was of Carrara marble. It's for Joseph Bond, who was the second owner of the house on Coleman Hill, now known as Woodruff House. Gabriel is at the top of this monument, and then on the 4 corners where you see the broken piece of marble, one section, there were 4 heroic figures standing. They were deliberately knocked over many years ago. I found an early newspaper, something about 40 or 50 years ago, showing vandalism that had occurred at that time. And then the tornado came along, and the vibration from the railroad, which is just below us, has done its damage along with the continuing vandalism. The lower level of the Bond and Johnston lots. When Mr. Johnston came back from Italy and had plans drawn by a New York architect for his Italianate house, he also had designs done for this plot. And Mr. Bond, being a neighbor of his, evidently agreed to go along with this plan. It is one of the most beautiful spots in the cemetery, and tragic that it has been so devastated as it has been, but the remnants are still beautiful. A crypt set back in the side of the hill for the Washington family is another interesting point in Rose Hill Cemetery. There are several along that ridge, and originally, history tells us there was a glass door there in the center of the wall that gave entrance to the vault where the bodies were placed. The story goes that the federal troops, and I don't know whether this is true at all, but they had gotten word that the man buried in there had been buried with some of his gold, and they broke the door and went in, and finding no gold, they removed the silver handles from the casket, and consequently that opening had to be sealed. It's been bricked up at this point. Pillars are often thought of in connection with cemeteries and early art. You'll see embroideries of a funeral pyre with a weeping willow. This is a beautiful spot here looking over to more of those crypts there. The Ziegler plot on the left and the Adams and Flanders family in the brick, the old red brick enclosure. Just above, with the magnolia tree, is the monument to Dr. Ambrose Baber, who was one of Macon's founders, and he founded the Macon Lodge Number 5, and he founded one of the founders of Christ Episcopal Church. To the left is the monument of Colonel John Basil Lamar, who was killed in the Battle of Crampton's Gap during the war between the states. Now we are in the old Hebrew burial ground, and this is the earliest in Rose Hill Cemetery for the Jewish congregation. It's one of the most fascinating parts of Rose Hill Cemetery because there's so many people here who came from many parts of Europe. This one is our beloved sister, Sarah Woolbach Strauss of New York, who died in Morgan, Georgia. This one is to Abraham Fendig. He was born at Sembach, Bavaria in 1834. There's a family of Fendigs in Brunswick, Georgia now, and they, I'm sure, must be descended from this family. If you look, all of the monuments are from Russia, from Germany, Prussia, all parts of Europe are represented here in this generation of Hebrew families who came to Georgia and settled here in central Georgia. This one says, born 1821, Hohenzollern, Germany, and here just the next one over, Levi Byrne, a native of Hohenzollern, Prussia. And then the others are primarily Hebrew. They're all done basically in Hebrew. And they move on down into this section here of this plot. Then it was that this area was filled, and the conservative congregation selected a plot over in this area of the cemetery where they are now buried, and the Reformed congregation, of course, is the William Wolfe congregation, the William Wolfe Cemetery there of the Temple, Beth Israel. Now we are across on the other side of the William Wolfe Cemetery before the Dannenberg Mausoleum. This carries a date of 1910. The Dannenbergs came to Macon in the early years and were very prominent in the business world of Macon and the civic world. The Dannenberg Company was a dry goods store on 3rd Street on the corner of Poplar. That was a very successful merchandising outfit for many, many years. Mr. Walter Dannenberg was the founder of that firm, and his son Joe Dannenberg, and he's now a grandson, Walter Dannenberg. All of these people have always lived in Macon. This is another interesting type of funeral sculpture. Now we go to the Bertha Wolfe Monument. Okay. The Bertha Wolfe Monument, to me, is one of the handsomest pieces of statuary out here. Bertha Wolfe was the wife of Mr. William Wolfe, members of the Temple Beth Israel, the Reformed congregation, and when the old Hebrew burial plot was filled, the congregation felt that they needed another cemetery, and they purchased from the city of Macon this portion of Rose Hill, or actually a part of Oak Ridge Cemetery. The cost of the land here was about $800, and Mr. William Wolfe underwrote the expense of it and presented the deed to the congregation, and consequently they named the cemetery for him, the William Wolfe Cemetery. And Bertha Wolfe, of course, was his. This is a mausoleum to the Happ family. The Happs came to Macon a good many years ago. There were a prominent family here in Macon, established the Happ Brothers Company, and for many years they made overalls and men's pants and so forth. This mausoleum sits across the road from the William Wolfe Cemetery in what is part of the Riverside Cemetery, and many members of the Happ family are buried here. It's a very beautiful example of this style of funerary art that came along at the turn of the century. Mausoleum, just across the street from the Happ Mausoleum, is of the Elkin family, Mr. Eli Elkin and his descendants. The mausoleum has 1927, which was the time of the construction. It is within the iron fence enclosed area of the William Wolfe Cemetery. Mr. Eli Elkin, his son Stanley Elkin, his son-in-law Donald Rosen, and his grandson Stanley Rosen, all have played a very important part in the civic, social, and cultural life of Macon. Mr. Stanley Elkin's wife, Rosalind, was a great musician, still is for that matter, a great musician, and has been most active in the Macon Concert Association. I'm sure she must have been a charter member of the Community Concert Association when it was founded many years ago. This is an interesting mausoleum here for the cemetery. This is a unique monument, I think, for any cemetery. What we are trying to do in this tape is to pick out some unusual monuments that are in Rose Hill Cemetery and the more beautiful monuments. This one is in the William Wolfe Cemetery over the grave of John Marks, M-A-R-K-S. And it's a sort of a tabernacle with the urn on top of it, and then the bowl and pitcher. I've never been able to find out what the significance of the bowl and pitcher is, but it has been here now for a good many years. I think Mr. Marks, it says that he was born in Prussia in 1828. I don't know whether there's a death date. Yes, he died in Macon, Georgia, 1897. But there's another great point in Rose Hill Cemetery. In memoriam James H.R. Washington, 1809, 1866, and his wife Mary Ann Hammond, 1816, 1901. The monument has the coat of arms, the Washington crest near its base. Mr. Washington was mayor of Milledgeville and also mayor of Macon, a very prominent citizen. The monument also indicates his wife, Mary Ann Hammond. She was the one who founded the Society of the Daughters of the American Revolution in Georgia, and there is a chapter, the Mary Hammond Washington chapter of the DARs in Macon. Their daughter, Ellen Clayton Washington, is buried over here, and actually she married a Mr. Bellamy. She lived with Mr. Bellamy for a number of years and then divorced him for desertion. She is the person who gave the city of Macon the sum of $50,000 and her property on the corner of Washington Avenue and College Street for a library. And it was given in memory of Hugh Vernon Washington, the monument over to the side, which also is a very handsome monument. It says, patriot, scholar, humanitarian, just, generous, gentle, and honorable. His life was a record of duty nobly done. Mausoleum of North Winship and his wife, Catherine Colfeld Winship. North Winship, a native of Macon, went on in the consular service to become, at the time of his retirement, ambassador to the Union of South Africa. He owned the country place known as Breezy Hill out on Forest Hill Road, which is now a real estate development known as Winship North. They are buried in this old fence-enclosed lot. The fence is a particularly handsome one, too, because Isaac Scott was one of North Winship's ancestors. And at the time that he built this mausoleum, he had the fence copied to include this tract here so that they could place the mausoleum within the enclosure. Isaac Scott was another very interesting person whose monument we see right next to it. This is the Isaac Scott lot, and the monument in the rear is to his daughter, Caroline Augusta. And it's a beautiful piece of what they call funerary art, and very little of it has been damaged. The vandals have done considerable damage throughout Rose Hill Cemetery. I do notice that possibly one of the fingers on the angel is missing, but there's a scroll in her hand, and she is pointing to heaven, and the scroll says, "He is not here, he is risen." The monument to Isaac Scott, another beautiful piece of cemetery art, is very handsome for many reasons. The obelisk has a draping at the top. The drapery at the top of the obelisk denotes, of course, the mourning. And then the urns with the flame finials are very handsome. Isaac Scott lived on Georgia Avenue in one of the fine old houses. It still stands. I have found a copy of his journal at the Washington Memorial Library that he started just before the beginning of the war between the states. And he deplored the activity that was taking place in the South in the way of secession. And on one occasion he makes a note in his journal that the bells of the churches are ringing to celebrate the fact that South Carolina has just seceded from the Union. And he later went on to New York and was a very successful businessman there. Lieutenant Bobby is another interesting spot here in the cemetery. There are several dogs buried here. Lieutenant Bobby was a pet of Captain D.C. Harris, Jr. And Lieutenant Bobby was commissioned by President Coolidge as a full lieutenant for his active duty in attending the classes with Captain Harris over at Fort Benning. He had his harness and a small sword that he wore on dress occasions, and Captain Harris and Lieutenant Bobby always were in the parades, any special occasion there. Well, Veterans Day, for instance, or Armistice Day. Captain Harris was very active in the service, and Lieutenant Bobby was always with him. The dog was killed when he fell down an elevator shaft. Captain Harris was visiting some friends in a downtown hotel, and the dog fell down the elevator shaft. On one of my rambles, when I mentioned that he had died, this lady spoke up and said, "Yes, I went there to the undertaker's, and the room was full of flowers. They had Lieutenant Bobby laid out there." These two on-top graves are the only ones in Rose Hill Cemetery. The daughter of Dr. D.W. Hammond, who is buried in this plot, and her husband. Unfortunately, the portion of his grave bearing the inscription with the name and the crown on top is missing. Evidently, it was broken off by vandals and stolen. Recently, our Middle Georgia Historical Society had these tops removed, put over out on the grass, and entirely reworked. The shell ornamentation was broken on one of them, and when we had them redone, sanded, painted, and so forth, we also had the brick bases rebuilt and then put the ironwork back on them. The monument here in the lot to another one of Dr. Hammond's daughters is made either of lead or zinc, and it's a very unusual one. There are just a few such monuments in Rose Hill. Go ahead. The Woolahen monument is one of the interesting ones, a unique monument for Rose Hill Cemetery, I think almost for any cemetery. The father and son, William A. Woolahen and Andrew Martin Woolahen, were both Grand Secretaries of the Grand Lodge of Georgia, and their families set this monument up in their memory. The monument is supposed to depict it's supposed to be a replica of King Solomon's temple. The 3 steps to the altar indicating the 3 degrees of masonry, and the altar with the square and the compass on the Bible. This you find, as I understand it from Mason, part of the Masonic order. It's been here, I would assume, since 1916. Well, no, actually, Mr. Andrew Martin Woolahen, the father, died in 1897, so he very probably was placed here at that time. Attracts a good bit of interest, a monument to Peter James Bracken, who, as you can read on the monument, was engineer of the locomotive Texas during the great locomotive chase in 1862. J.J. Flayhive monument, a beautiful piece of sculpture in the St. Joseph's Cemetery, which is a part of Rose Hill Cemetery. St. Joseph Catholic Church bought this plot of ground from the city prior to 1900. There are many members of the Roman Catholic Church buried throughout Rose Hill Cemetery prior to the development of St. Joseph. The name Flayhive was important in Macon for a number of years. There are no Flayhives listed in the telephone directory. I checked on it before I did this ramble. He came from Ireland, and as many of the Irish immigrants to the States, he was a saloon operator, and the name was well known in Macon at one time. This one is inscribed, he was born 1870, died in 1909, and it says, "A faithful husband, a father dear, a sincere friend lies buried here." The statuary, though, the Italian, the Carrara marble statue of the Sacred Heart of Jesus is particularly fine. This monument, the crucifix in the Dempsey lot, is one of the finest pieces of statuary, again, in the cemetery, and certainly in St. Joseph's Catholic Cemetery. Mr. Thomas Charles Dempsey was an early resident of Macon. He owned considerable land in downtown Macon and also out on what was Dempsey Avenue until they changed the name to the Mercer University Boulevard. He owned the land on the corner of Cherry and 3rd Streets, and at the time that the corporation came in to build a hotel in downtown Macon, they leased that corner land from Mr. Dempsey and named the hotel the Dempsey Hotel, one of the great hotels of the Southeast in its day. The monument was placed here in memory of Mrs. Dempsey's mother, who was Frances Adelia Wicks. And Mrs. Dempsey was the second wife of Mr. T.C. Dempsey. Mr. Dempsey is buried in Savannah with his first wife, but she was Lillian Wicks Dempsey. And when her mother died in 1908, she had this beautiful crucifix erected here. It is stained because Carrara marble does not weather very well, and it really never should have been used for outside memorial work, but it's stained badly, but it's still beautiful, and as I say, I think one of the handsomest monuments in Rose Hill. This is the lot of Judge Carlton Bicknell Cole, another one of the early citizens of Macon. Judge Cole was a prominent attorney. So many of the pioneer citizens in Macon came from New England, New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, New Hampshire. And this was also true of Judge Cole. He and his wife and his granddaughter are buried here in these three very impressive graves. And then here over on the other side, I think they're two of the handsomest graves from the standpoint of just simple, beautiful marble. The two sons of Judge Cole who were war casualties in the war between the states. One died in 1864 and the other one in 1865. The urn at the head of those graves is a particularly beautiful one. Judge Cole was a prominent attorney, as I said, and a judge, and Cole Street up on the hill was named for him. He had a residence in that part of town. Judge Cole and Ms. Cole had a daughter who married Mr. John H. Zeeland, and they lost this child at some point before the Zeelands left Macon. They left Macon shortly after, I assume, because none of the members of that family are buried here. But this is a joint lot of the Cole and Zeeland, and the grave is strangely inscribed, I think, "If I was so soon done, why, oh why, was I begun?" There are many interesting epitaphs, inscriptions throughout the cemetery. One over on the other side to Dr. Zuba says, "Been here and gone, had a good time." Grave of Harry Stillwell Edwards, 1855-1938, National Institute of Arts and Letters. Mr. Edwards was a great writer, and one of the most outstanding pieces of work was Sons and Fathers, which he wrote and was paid $10,000 by one of the magazines, and it later appeared in serial form throughout the country. He wrote many interesting books. Was a great Southern writer. He married into the Lane family. He's buried here on the Lane lot. His wife was Mary Roxy Lane, and they lived at Holly Bluff, short distance from Macon, which was later taken over by the United States government on two occasions for Camp Wheeler, and World War I and also World War II. That's it. This is the grave of Eugenia Tucker Fitzgerald, January 29th, 1834, December 10th, 1928. Founder, Alpha Delta Pi sorority, May 15th, 1851, Wesleyan College, Macon, Georgia. You'll see the insignia at the top there above the name, the Adelphian Society. We live for each other, with the two hands joined. This very unusual crypt, I assume, is the grave of her father, and the one beyond it of her mother. They're both beautiful pieces of carving and unusual. And I hope that if you all come to Rose Hill Cemetery, you'll make a point of coming to this lot. It attracts many visitors to Rose Hill Cemetery. This is an interesting plot. Being part of the Lamar lot, and there are members of the Bacon, Lamar, Loughran, Singleton, Ogden, Sparks families, all descended from Henry Graybill Lamar, who's buried within this plot. A son-in-law, Augustus Octavius Bacon, whose dates you can see there, 1839, 1914, was a great citizen of Macon. You'll see that he was a member of the Georgia legislature for 14 years, 8 years of which served as a Speaker of the House of Representatives, United States Senator, and President pro tem of the United States Senate. Senator Bacon died in 1914 and left a sizable tract of land across the river, part of it being what is now known as Shirley Hills, the residential section. He also set aside a sizable tract to be known as Baconsfield Park, which he gave to the city of Macon. Unfortunately, in his will, he spelled out the fact that it was to be a park for the white women, the white children, the white girls, and the white boys of Macon. And for many years, it was as beautiful a spot as there was in the city. The city maintained it. The row of magnolia trees that you see going down Nottingham Drive were all planted as part of Baconsfield Park. It was filled with dogwood, azaleas, camellias. At one point it had a small lake. And for a few years they had a small zoo over there. And it was a beauty spot in Macon. But in the last 25 years, I would say, it finally went, after being involved in litigation, it finally went to the Supreme Court, and they said that it could no longer be used under the terms of Senator Bacon's will as a city park, and it would revert to his heirs. And as a result, we have McDonald's, and we have business complexes, and I think just recently Kroger's has opened up, is getting ready to develop a big super grocery store over on that plot. On this monument here to John Hill Lamar, he is a man who owned a house on Orange Street across from the Washington Memorial Library. It has now been taken over by the Macon Heritage Foundation and has been made into condominiums. I think possibly 5 apartments there, and has been beautifully restored. John Hill Lamar, Colonel, 64th Georgia Regiment, fell July 9th, 1864, age 25. It's interesting that on one side of the monument it says, "By the grace of God, I am what I am." And then on the other side, "The only son of his mother, and she a widow." These plots along here are all very interesting because they contain the remains of some of Macon's early and very prominent citizens. It is zinc, right.
Okay.
Now this is another interesting monument in this same Lamar plot. The zinc monument, which was put up in memory of Henry G. Lamar, Henry Graybill Lamar, and his wife, Mary Ann Lamar. And it's hollow and a very strange piece of work, but I think the ornamentation on it is very fine. There are perhaps 3 or 4 zinc monuments in the cemetery. He died in 1861. I don't know whether that had anything to do with the type of monument they put up. Maybe it did. Maybe the marble was not available. I can't answer that. But In this same lot is the mausoleum, a marble mausoleum containing the remains of Gasoline. Is also, this mausoleum is also in the Lamar plot because it contains the remains of Mary Gasoline Lamar and her husband, William Lee Ellis. Mrs. Ellis left a very interesting will. She was born in 1844, died in 1922, and she had named her executors, but because of the unusual terms of her will, the executors would not qualify, and this matter stayed in the courts for about 20 years before the estate was finally settled, and I think it resulted in about 50% of the estate having been eaten up in litigation. Christ Church was left $1,000 under Ms. Ellis's will, and I think we finally were able to get about $500 out of it. This is the Dessau lot. The first Dessau to come to Macon was Abraham Dessau. He was born in Hamburg, Germany, 1802, died in New York in 1883. His wife, Fanny Dessau, born in Chatham, England in 1820, died New York, 1897. Mr. and Ms. Dessau had a son, Washington Dessau, a very prominent attorney in Macon. He and his wife are buried in this lot. Their son, Washington Dessau II, who was the founder of the Dessau Realty and Insurance Company, is not buried here, but his sister and members of her family are buried here. Gertrude Dessau Wheeler. And here we have Cordelia Dessau McCall and her husband. There are many members of this family buried in this plot.